Hello, viewers. This is Passion 9. You're watching the Passion 9 stream. I'm back. It's been a while. It's been a couple weeks. I don't think I've streamed since April, actually. I don't think I have. But, I'm back with some final thoughts on Resident Evil 2, the remake. I've been revisiting it recently for the first time in, a couple months. I was knee-deep with Sekiro, of course, and have streamed a lot of that game. Maybe too much, you might say. But Sekiro was really good. I'm actually getting pretty close to the end of that one, and looking forward to eventually finishing it off, but it took a while. It finally hit that point where I'm burned out on another From Software game. I feel like that's always going to happen inevitably with those games. You play a crap ton at first, and then sooner or later, that formula does start to burn you out, kinda, because, it's such a challenging game or whatever. I still think it's one of the easier From Software games, because it took a lot longer for me to hit that burnout than some of their previous efforts, but, anyway, this isn't final thoughts on Sekiro, this is final thoughts on Resident Evil 2, so let's stay on topic. So I've been coming back to this game a little bit after, the long break away from it. And of course, that's always good because you come back to a game that, you had a lot of enthusiasm for, and, maybe your perspective has changed a little. Maybe it's given you some new thoughts, some new, feelings, and, new ideas of maybe what it could have been. But that's not to say that, I'm suddenly gonna dog on RE2 as, like, a bad game, or a mediocre game, or even just an above-average game. I still defend it as a great game, actually. So, we'll get that right out of the way first, I still love this game. I still think, it's still too early in the year to say, like, I don't know that it's the best one of the year or whatever. I don't know, Sekiro might actually steal that away, but I never play every single game that comes out every year anyway, so I'm never gonna be that person. So it's not like I'm ever gonna have like a best games of the year list or anything, because I never play enough games each year to be that interested. I always know at this point what I'm going to want to play and what I'm going to avoid. So, especially since they're expensive and, time-consuming and, So, I'm not going to say if it's Game of the Year material or not, because I don't freaking know. What I will say is that it's definitely, I'll stand by, before I get into the criticism, the critique. And yes, I am going to play some while I'm rambling on, because it would be torturous for you guys to just stare at these still images while I'm going on and on. I figure we'll just play some of these Ghost Survivor missions in the background, just so I can talk shit, but you guys still have more to look at. I don't know if my voice alone is entertaining enough, but maybe it is. I don't know. I'll let you guys decide that. I don't know. Seriously, though, the best thing I could say about this game before I start digging my chops into it is it's definitely the most polished and well-structured survival horror game, in my opinion, since Silent Hill 3, I want to say. Because for me, that's the last time I played a survival horror game that was like A tier. That was like top AAA. I know some people aren't going to consider that game a AAA, or any little horror game a AAA, but I don't know. Everybody's got their own definition of AAA, I suppose. To me, it's just any game that, just brings all the bells and whistles, brings a full package, feels like a high production, and this is certainly that. Like, I stand by that. It's a very beautifully well-made, very tightly constructed horror game. and a lot of love went into it for sure. So I'm not saying it's the best horror game I've played, period, but it's the best designed one, just from a mechanical standpoint, from a visual standpoint. It's the best one I've played since Silent Hill 3. So that's gonna be the nicest thing I say for the rest of the video. Which is still high praise, I'd say. Obviously, Silent Hill 3 was wasn't exactly the same beast. It wasn't exactly the same type of horror, but just in terms of quality, I think it's definitely in that same bracket. Unfortunately, having revisited it recently, having played the second runs a lot, and having just spent more time replaying it and sinking a whole lot of hours into it, because it is damn fun to play. What I will say is there are a lot of missed opportunities in this game. It's one of those unique cases where it's more about what isn't there rather than what is, because most of what is pretty great. I would say the first run campaigns for both Claire and Leon are superb. They're just like, so well paced and so well structured. I would even say to some extent the short length of the standard campaign for both characters is maybe more of a plus than a detriment. I think some people definitely considered it more of a detriment, but sometimes, I don't know, sometimes a shorter length, especially for a horror game, is definitely a positive. Because when you're building horror and suspense, you don't want to have to build it for too long. Alien Isolation had that problem. I still think Alien Isolation is an okay, like, it's a solid horror game, but honestly, the more time I've revisited it, and the more time has passed, I would actually say that game is far less great than it was initially for me. I find it very hard to replay, actually, and that's the big problem. Because it's 20 hours long. And Alien Isolation had no right to be 20 hours long. It's very one note. The hide-and-seek game with the alien itself gets very old. Not that far into the game, really. There's about half of a really great horror game in Alien Isolation. And when you get to a certain point, when you get to the halfway point of that game, it kind of turns into a slog. It remains visually beautiful, it remains very atmospheric, it just loses its suspense, because you start to realize they dragged it out far beyond, what they should have. That's unfortunate. I think Resident Evil 2 has that in its favor. It's nice and short, just like the 98 original. Almost note for note in length, actually. And that's actually ballsy, I'd even say. Because you would think after Resident Evil 4 and 5, like, the expectation would be that they would make it much bigger. I certainly had that expectation. I was expecting it to be... Oh, crap. Liquor. Not the good kind, not the kind you drink. This is the evil, wants to eat me liquor. Oh, goodness. I knew the liquor would catch up with me, viewers. I didn't know it would be the Resident Evil liquor, though. But yeah, I thought Capcom was definitely going to make the game bigger. And I'm kind of, sort of, again, to a point, I'm glad that they resisted that. It does show some restraint in some respects, but then again, by the same token, a lot of my criticism for the game does come down to what isn't there that could have been, probably should have been, given how long this remake was coming. Obviously, they weren't developing it for the last, couple of decades, but fans have certainly been asking for it and wanting it for quite some time. And you would think, after that many decades of saying, yeah, you know what, we're finally going to do it. We're going to remake Resident Evil 2. I was expecting something more ambitious in terms of scope. I wasn't expecting it to be like an open-world Raccoon City game where you're just exploring the entire city, because that would be ridiculous. Not saying it had to have a big, huge city to explore or anything, because that would really hurt the pacing. But it is very telling. Like, I think Yahtzee made a good point about this in his review over at Zero Punctuation, was, in the opening of the game, we have a lot of these sites in Raccoon City, and at one point there's even, to take it a bit further, to take Yahtzee's point a bit further, specifically there's a subway station in that opening intro, and it's a really cool opening intro, by the way. They seem to be borrowing, inspiration from, like, a Netflix TV show. I don't know, for some reason that whole opening intro just felt like the developers are just watching a shit ton of Netflix and were like, hey, we need to have an intro that's very, like, Netflixy, like, kind of short, but has a lot of, like, artsy images and whatever. Like, I don't know, I can't help but laugh a little. That's not, that's not a criticism, that's just me poking fun. It's a cool intro. It's actually quite a compliment, because I usually hate Netflix intros. But I don't know, for this remake, it actually worked, that style. That was a cool way to do an intro for this game. I just think it's funny, we've entered the age now where even video games have, like, Netflix-style intros. But back to real talk, real critique here. There's a subway station in that opening intro, and it got me thinking, why is there no subway station to explore in this game? That would have been a cool environment. They obviously hinted at it as though it's the only actual bit we see in that intro that isn't in the game itself. There's not even a mentioning of it, like, it's just there. Which is even weirder when you consider that it's not even referencing something from, like, the original 90s Resident Evils. Even in RE3, where you explore a little more of the city, there's no mentioning, or even at any point do we see a subway station. So I'm kind of like, oh, they just decided that should be in the intro. I guess because it's a cool visual, just to have a sort of empty, zombie-filled okay, that was like my tongue falling down the stairs. It's a cool visual to have a zombie subway station in your intro, I guess, but it got me thinking, like, why wasn't that in the game? That would have been cool. And it would have been something that wasn't in the original, which brings me to the larger problem I have with this game in general. Too much of what's in this game, this remake, is directly lifted from the original game, and I know that's a criticism that definitely deserves some elaboration, because, I mean, of course it's all lifted from the original, but to the point that it's not necessarily slavish, mind you. I'm not gonna go that far, because they made a lot of changes to that stuff. It's not like they did it lazy, where everything they took from the original 98 version was just like, hey, remember this, remember that. There's definitely some of that in this game, make no mistake, and it's tastefully done, for the most part. And they did put some new spins on a lot of those familiar things. I like the orphanage, even though it's not a fully explorable place. I mean, it's really just a set-piece location. But it was a neat idea to kind of expand on Chief Iron's character a bit, make him that much creepier and sadistic and weird. I like the handling of his character in general. Some of the new stuff they did with Ada is also pretty cool, I guess. Like, you know, Mr. X is more intimidating and scary than he ever was in the original, so that's cool too. I even like they added that silly little top hat, even though it's... I'm not sure why he has a little fedora or whatever that is on his head. He didn't have that in the original, so I guess they just thought, let's give him a hat. You know, but they made him, like, scarier. They made him more intense. I do miss when we have the cutscene in the original game where he drops from the capsule in the helicopter. So we know he's from Umbrella. We know he's, like... For some reason, they didn't go that route in this one. He just kind of appears. But it's really cool how he does. Where he's lifting the giant helicopter out of the way, and, you know, it's very Terminator-esque. Like, he was always obviously inspired by, like, the Terminator, the T-101 or whatever. T-800, whatever the hell it is. So that's cool. I'm not as big or sold on his Tyrant form, though. His Tyrant form at the end of the game bothers me a little. I don't think it's, like... There's something about that new design that just looks kind of pitiful rather than scary. And for some reason he looks tubbier. Like, they made him kind of tubby and muscular, but it... I remember, like, the Tyrant from the original game being very tall and just more intimidating looking at the end of the game. You know... I don't know. That's probably the only criticism I have of Mr. X, actually, is that his... at least with him in general, some of the ways they use him in the game, which I'll get to in a bit, is... That I do have trouble with, but... Just the way they handled him as a monster throughout most of the game is really a nice... You know... He's mostly the same monster, but it's still... They definitely made him more interesting from a gameplay standpoint. Like, the way he just grills you throughout that whole police station. Which I know was very contentious at first for a lot of people, but I think it's pretty well handled. The fact that he's not just a wall blocking your progress, you know, he's not just in your way. You can skillfully place a couple of shots to the head, and he might kneel for a bit, giving you just enough time to get something done or get out of the way. Is a cool element of strategy. There's a desperation to it. Like, you do have to stay on your toes with him. But you could also throw a flash grenade. It will blind him temporarily, which you obviously can't do with all the monsters. You know, the lickers are blind. Can't do it with them. There's all these nice little touches of strategy that have been added to this game that I definitely appreciate. But back to the critique. Back to... You know, I'm still being too nice to this game. I gotta get to the parts that I don't like, so we can get that on. Because when I first bought and played this game, I was way too enthusiastic about it, and I was way too, like, fanboying out about all the things they got right. So it's time to talk about what they didn't get so right. Again, where's the new stuff? This is a remake, and it's a remake of a game from the PlayStation 1 era where, you know, hardware was in another dimension, practically. I do appreciate them keeping the game as small as they did to a certain extent, because I think there are plenty of games these days that are too big, try to go too long, and especially survival horror. You know, I think survival horror especially has had that problem these days. I've said it about Alien, so... I'm glad the game's not too big, but on the other hand, it's really kind of tiny. It's tiny to the point where, like, on replays, I actually get a little sad when I get to the sewer section, because I'm kind of like, oh man, this game's already almost over. It's like, I'm already almost done with this. I'm already... Umbrella's days are numbered. I'm already almost at the end. I'm gonna fight William Birkin's final form, get on the train, and that's the end of the game. Like... And that's when, like, I start thinking, why not a subway station? Would have been cool. We've never had that in any Resident Evil game, actually. It would have been a new location. Why not some new monsters? No new bosses, no new... I mean, I know those plant monsters in the laboratory were technically new, But again, a lot of my problems with this game is that even the stuff that seems new is mostly just a spin on what we've seen before. It's like, you know, they just reflavored something familiar, but it's still what you expect. You know, of course you expect the plant monsters to be at the end of that, you know, in the laboratory or whatever. I didn't expect them to redesign them and make them these plant zombies instead of, well, the walking campy vegetable things they were in the original. But it's still the same idea, like, oh yeah, plant monsters, you know, whatever. Why not something new? Even the original Resident Evil remake did have at least one new monster, one new boss to deal with. That was not in the original. And, you know, crap, I'm out of ammo here. Oh my goodness. I don't think Kendo's gonna last much longer. But that's okay. Back to the review, viewers. I digress. Unfortunately, Robert Kendo's survival is not... that's not my primary concern for this video, so we're not going to worry about it too much. At least you get to see a cool death animation. Okay, so... I should also point out I've never actually beaten one of these DLC missions, because I don't find them that interesting or compelling. I think that's kind of shitty content, actually, if I'm being honest. That's another criticism I have here. I was a little excited about the DLC stuff because I thought maybe now that's how they're going to give us new locations, or, you know, some new stuff to explore, maybe some new enemy types. And then I found out that these DLC missions, these little side episodes or whatever they're supposed to be, weren't even canon. They're not even based in the main plot of the game. They're just what-ifs. They're just these kind of... I mean, it's basically just Capcom's way of saying, yeah, these actually are not scripted, interesting story bits. They're just... It's basically just an arcade mode where you're playing with these character models, and it's very hasty, very rushed fan fiction is basically what it is. If you could even call it that, because there's not even much of a plot to any of these DLC missions. They're really half-hearted. You don't get new locations. It's just reusing locations from the main game, which is problematic, because there's not that many locations from the main game. You don't want to reuse those, because it dampens the atmosphere and the presence, and, you know, it dampens, like, your enjoyment of it. Because you're just like, oh, this place again? You know, I know this is coming from somebody who defends Nier Automata, which, you know, did reuse a lot of areas, to be fair. But that was a very different game in structure and everything else, so, you know, not really comparable. In this case, it's like you got this tiny, short little campaign that's mostly the same between both characters, between Claire and Leon. There aren't that many differences between them. And I'll get into that, because that's going to be where I really go off. But, yeah, the DLC, just as a side note, I guess, since I am playing it for background noise, you know, I think it's pretty bad DLC, if I'm being completely honest. You know, I hesitated for a while to say that, because I feel like, for a while I felt like being too harsh about anything they did with this game was unwarranted, because it is, you know, again, where it works really well, they did a fantastic job. They did a great job, but they did a great job in the most predictable way. I guess that's the problem. There's not much inspiration to this game. Which is a strange thing to say about a game that I love so much, but, you know, I guess that's that's inevitable when you're dealing with a remake of something that was already great. I'll bet dated now, but... Yeah, this DLC just kind of, like... I'm only playing it now because of this stream, because I want to... give my thoughts on the game itself. And playing the main campaign requires a lot more thought and a lot more... You know, I wouldn't be able to talk as well if I was playing the main game, so... Because this is less important, it's something that's better for background fodder. I guess that's the only good thing about this DLC. It's fine to play as just an arcade mode, but it really... I just don't think it has any value beyond that. It's just like... It's reused assets from the main game, just kind of cobbled together. There's some silly unlockables, or characters can wear funny hats and stuff, but seriously, who cares? It's not meaningful content. And yes, it's free DLC, but again, your time is not free, so I think that's always a poor excuse with anything. It's like, well, at least they made the DLC free. And it's like, yeah, but it's still shit content, so who cares? I'd rather pay for good content than get free content that I'm not going to do anything with. You know? I don't mind spending money when it's meaningful. And if you're going to give me something free... I mean, I hate to be that guy, but we live in a world where free is usually not as good as when you gotta give to get. Because there's usually a reason you gotta give to get. So yeah, don't care that the DLC is free, it sucks. Now on to the main game. Like I said before, I love the content with... The main campaign with Claire and Leon is great. What's not great is that unlike the 1998 original, where content and enemies and events in the story were well spread out between the two characters and their second runs, in this remake, that's been completely thrown out the window. Like, they did not give a crap. Now, I don't know if this was a time issue, if they just didn't have enough development time to realize it. I'm kind of banking on the latter. Oh, wait, I didn't add a ladder. What the hell am I talking about? I'm kind of banking on that, I'm saying. I'm kind of banking on that because... It seems like they wanted to. I know they played the original a lot for reference. You know, the developers were very enthusiastic about it. They were obviously a passionate young team. You know, just something Capcom clearly hasn't had much of in a long time, so it's cool to see them put together like a younger team of passionate developers that really wanted to... They were fans of the original, obviously. I mean, it shows in the remake. They obviously wanted to make something that really captured what was great about the original. Unfortunately, again, with the campaigns, like, Claire and Leon's, I'm just going to call them first runs, because that's what the game calls them. They were A and B routes in the original, but who cares? The first runs are... The first runs are exactly the same for Claire and Leon in terms of where they are in the story. And this is where it gets a little complicated, because it's really hard explaining... It's hard explaining why that doesn't work. Because it was kind of a complicated thing in the original, which is what's impressive about the original Resident Evil 2. One of my favorite things about that game, and why I think it was the best game in the series, if we're just talking about, you know, the pre-Resident Evil 4 titles, where it was more about the slow-paced horror stuff, was because you not only had these two characters, you had two characters that were seeing the story from two separate perspectives. You were getting these parallel story beats. And so if you started the game as Leon, you would see the story from one perspective, and then whoever you chose for your second character, they would officially be seeing the other side of the story that Leon was not involved with. So not only did they both have not only were they both in different places within the story, and yes, I'm aware they weren't literally in different places. You are still going through the police station, you're still solving the same puzzles, and I'm okay with that because, you know, it's a schlocky horror game. You could suspend your disbelief when it comes to gameplay, when it comes to puzzles and, you know, stuff like that that's not really meant to be taken literally within the game itself. Oh, I got a phone call. Hold on just a minute, viewers. Hello? 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 That is me. I'm good. What is the call for? That's correct. Oh, that's okay. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm already getting those, though. So while that would be nice if I didn't have them already, I do. So also, no offense, but your accent gives me the impression that you're probably a scammer. So I'm gonna hang up. Bye. Okay, sorry about that, viewers. Was rudely interrupted by a con artist on the phone. I get those a lot, unfortunately. I thought it was a meaningful call that would be worth the interruption, you know? But of course, that's... of all the things it had to be a scammer. And it's sad to say, but you can always tell. Anyhow, where was my thought? I had a thought. It was an ongoing thought. What was I babbling about? Oh, right. The campaigns with Claire and Leon. So you had these campaigns, played as Leon first, you'd see the story from Claire's perspective. If you played Claire first, then you would open up a campaign that would show things from Leon's perspective, you know, vice versa. Bada bada bang, bada boom. So that was really cool, because technically not only did you have two different characters that were going to see the story from two different perspectives, but depending on the order you played them in, both Leon and Claire have two different versions of their game. So this essentially means you had 4 campaigns. And yes, there were going to be a lot of similarities between all of them. You are still in the same locations, mostly. You're still solving the same puzzles, mostly. So, from a mechanical and gameplay standpoint, it's still the same game, roughly. You do get different bosses, depending on those perspectives. In fact, I think one of the more clever bits of pacing in the original game was that, depending on, you know, whose campaign you were on, whether it was Claire's A or B campaign or Leon's A or B campaign, you would see different forms of William Birkin. You would fight him in different forms. You wouldn't get to see all of them unless you played all 4 campaigns, so you always saw something new. You always had some new surprise in every campaign. You were learning new things about the story, you were learning new things about the characters, you were seeing characters from different angles, you know, different story angles and stuff. Now, I'm not saying that that was, like, perfectly believably set up or anything. I'm not saying that the game, you know, had that down to a T, but for a game in the 90s, especially a schlocky horror game like that, you know, it certainly didn't have to be that intricate and full of surprises and that replayable. Like, it really just added such a fun sense of discovery. Every time you started a new game, within those 4 campaigns, you were getting a different version of Resident Evil 2. You were getting a different version of that game. And they played in a way that each A and B campaign whether it was Leon first or Claire first, each version of that campaign, you at least get 2 canon stories, 2 canon versions of the story. So there's even some, like, you know, consistency within it, where it's like, you know, once you've played all 4 campaigns, you can decide for yourself which one you think is, you know, the one you're most willing to go with, or whatever. Which is just a cool feature to have in a game that didn't even need it. Didn't even have to go that far. It could have been more like the original Resident Evil. It could have just been, here's 2 characters, they have different keys and different weapons, but they're gonna get the same story. The fact that Resident Evil 2 in '98 was such a, like, puzzle box of story beats and little revelations, and it was just really neat. Like, you know, we're not talking about a big, lengthy 60-hour RPG here. We're talking about this little, you know, George A. Romero influenced schlockfest of a horror game. It didn't have to be that elaborately structured, and that was cool. That was neat to have. You know, it was something that I've also never seen any other video game ever do before or after, which is puzzling. But that brings me to the remake, which of course does not have any of that, and it's so disappointing because they clearly wanted you to think that you were going to get those 4 campaigns. You don't. You don't at all, and that's one of my biggest criticisms with the game, actually, is that you don't get that. And what's even stranger is that even in the first run campaigns for Claire and Leon, you're getting 2 different versions of the story. It's not like you play as Leon first, or play as Claire first, and then you see what the other character was up to when you play their story. You know, you're not seeing the story from a different perspective, you're just getting the same story, kinda? I mean, the secondary characters you encounter will change things up. That's probably the biggest difference between the 2 characters, at least on the first runs, is that, you know, Claire encounters Sherry, Leon encounters Ada. So you do have different story beats going on, but that's only in the first run. The second run for either character is just going to hit those same beats, and you're not going to see what the other character was up to. So it's almost like they just switch places. You're really just... I mean, I wish I had a better comparison point, because in gaming, there really is no comparison point. No other game was structured like that back in '98, and certainly not today. But essentially, the idea is, even if both characters are going through the same locations, you know, in the original game, you at least sort of got the impression that you were seeing, you know, where Leon was in the original story at a certain time while Claire was off doing this or that. Both characters felt like they were actually involved with a bigger story. And when you played as one, you only got half of that story. When you played as the other, you got the other half. And that's the weird thing about Resident Evil 2 Remake. The story doesn't really make sense. Which, I mean, I realize that's a bit of a loaded statement, because nothing in Resident Evil, if I'm being completely honest, makes that much sense. But, I mean, it's Resident Evil, but... Again, it's schlock horror. It's mostly very campy, but... Obviously, when I say it doesn't make sense, I'm talking about structure, I'm talking about pacing. It doesn't... There's no consistency to the multiple paths with the characters. You're basically getting one version of the story, and you can choose who's going to be the hero of that story. Is it going to be Claire or Leon? But then, what was the other character up to? Because whoever you choose to play as, the other character just kind of goes off into a void. We don't even see Claire and Leon interact as much in this game as they did in the original. Which, you know, they didn't do that much in the original. But I remember them having, like, walkie-talkies. Leon and Claire both shared these walkie-talkies at an early point in that game. So you did have dialogue exchanges between them throughout the whole game. And for some reason, that's not included in this one. I mean, it's still set in the 90s, so obviously walkies would make sense. But we never see that. You do have some walkie-talkie stuff going on with Marvin in the beginning of the game, which is even funnier because that wasn't the case in the original. Marvin just, you know, they definitely did a good job expanding on his character compared to the original. But yeah, Leon and Claire, they meet at the gas station. You know, they escape to Raccoon City together because there's zombies everywhere, and find more zombies. Guess they really should have went the other way, but yeah, and you know, they meet again at the gate very early in the game, and then we don't see them interact again at all until the very, very end. So it's like, I'm surprised these characters even decided to meet up again. It's almost weird that they did. But again, I don't want to get too bogged down in those details because this is Resident Evil. I don't want to overthink the story that much. At least not the logistics of it, because there's no freaking logic. I mean, it's... But the pacing, like, there's a really good example of this, of what I'm talking about, is early in the game, in the first run, or the second run, actually, doesn't matter which, you know, you start the game regardless of which character you choose to play as. When both characters split up and they get to the city, there's this tiny little alleyway that leads to the RPD police station. And I basically just said police station twice, I think. It's just this little alleyway. It's very short. It doesn't take that long to get to the police station itself, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. There is something wrong, however, with the fact that when you play as the other character, and they're, you know, because they're splitting up or whatever, that other character is still going through that same little alleyway that leads to the police station. And even that's not a problem. Where it becomes a problem is, there's a point where you play the second run, either as Claire or Leon. Again, doesn't really matter which in this case. But depending on who you're playing as, after going through the little alleyway, in the second run, you're still going through that alleyway, and you're supposed to be getting to the police station hours after the other character. Hours. Like, a lot of time has passed, or it certainly seems to, because you get there when the helicopter crashes into the building. That's the second run. And no matter who you're playing as, the second run character goes through the same alleyway that only takes, like, literally, I think, a minute and a half. You get to the gate where they both meet up again. You know, the gate outside the police station. And the other character from the first run campaign is already at the police station, because you're supposed to be getting there later with the second character. But it doesn't make any sense. They literally, and the problem with this is that there's a cutscene emphasizing it just mere, like, again, like 2 minutes before you get to the building. Claire and Leon are like, let's split up, they're everywhere, I'll meet you at the police station, okay. So then you're on your way there. For some reason, even though it's the second run, and you're supposed to be getting to the police station later than the first character, like, again, let's say Leon was your first character. Claire's the second one you're playing as. She's supposed to be getting to the police station at a later point. It's even further emphasized in that first campaign, where you're talking to Marvin, and they're like, oh, that's Claire. I met her on the way into the city. I'm glad to see she's still okay. And she's like in the back of the station. It's supposed to be at a later point. But it's very strange. The timing is off in a lot of ways that are weird. And then they're both at this gate, and they're like, oh wow, so you finally got here, and you know, you got any keys on you so I can get in? It's like, no. How have you been holding up? It's like you both saw each other 2 minutes ago somehow. It doesn't add up. You came for the same burning street. you got to the police station through the same route that supposedly Leon or Claire did on that first run. So nothing really adds up. It feels like a missed opportunity. Now, the reason I say this is not even entirely because of how illogical it is. I mean, sure it is. But I'd even be okay with that if it wasn't for the fact that it's a missed opportunity for the game. Why not give us an interesting reason for why Claire gets to the police station at a later point? Why not have an interesting, longer route? Maybe she had to take a different set of alleys and streets, or, dare I say, subways. Subway station. We could have had, like, a new area, a new location before she even gets to the police station. And that could have been the second run for either character. Whatever you did, whoever you chose for that first part of the story where you're just getting through the short little alley, getting into the police station, boom, you're there. The other character in the second run could have had, like, this whole other path. I'm not saying, give us a whole separate game. Obviously, the police station is still going to be the biggest area. It's still going to be where you're spending most of the game. And both characters have to get there for narrative reasons. But why not take advantage of this unique two-character system and use that as a good reason to give us something new on that second run? Something we haven't seen. Why not have Claire have one other location to explore before she got to the police station? You know what I mean? Like, that would have been freaking awesome. And it would have given this game more replay value overall. Instead of both second runs just being kind of like, oh, it's more of the same, but shorter and harder. Now the shorter part is especially a problem because the game's short enough. And the short length that it has in those first run campaigns is like already pushing it just a tad. It's already a little too short. But the second runs especially are just not fun to play, in my opinion. So let's get to that. Let's get to the second runs and why I think those are the worst parts of Resident Evil 2, why I think it's the biggest disappointment for the game in general, and why it knocks this game down for me from being like, I'm not a score guy. I'm not big on giving games or movies or anything else scores, but just for the sake of argument, for conversation or whatever. What knocks it for being like, S tier to like A tier or A tier to B tier? A peg, The second run campaigns are stupid. They're not fun to play. Making the campaign shorter and harder is not fun because the game is already perfectly balanced difficulty-wise. It's already hard enough, especially since you already have difficulty options. And there's just not enough done with the second run as far as differences go to make it fun to do. Like, yeah, upping the challenge is something, I guess. But again, the game didn't need it. And it ups the challenge in a way that just makes it frustrating. It makes it tedious. Again, mileage will vary. You might have a different opinion. Maybe you really like the difficulty of the second runs, but I do not. I think it's more an issue of pacing, because part of what makes the second runs more difficult is the pacing. It's not as tightly paced. It feels like the game is condensed to the point where you have to rush a lot of your resource management, you have to rush a lot of the puzzle solving and key hunting. There's just too much going on all at once, right when you get to the police station. Mr. X is already on your heels. If anything, the second run, I feel, should have been either longer or just as short as the main campaign. It shouldn't have been shorter, because that's definitely, that's bad. It just feels like they kind of rushed all that. It feels like a compromise, like they didn't necessarily want to go that route, but maybe development time was hard. Maybe Capcom just didn't give them enough time to really put that stuff into it. It definitely feels like that's the case. Again, I don't want to say, you know, oh, the team, you know, were lazy or whatever, because I don't really know the case. I don't really know what went on behind the scenes. But it seems like the stuff they did have time for, they definitely put a lot of effort into. Like, a ridiculous amount of effort went into this game. And I definitely don't want to call it a lazy game, or they rushed the whole thing. The stuff that really shows a lot of attention to detail and care, which is everything that's in the game, you know. The DLC content, that's the stuff that feels rushed and cheap and whatever. But, you know, because it's just reused assets. It's not like they did anything new, really. They just rearranged old assets from the main game. Any modder can do that. That's not valuable DLC content. But, it's just a case of, like, missed opportunities. It really should have been, but those second runs should have been more interesting. Or they shouldn't have been in the game at all, and maybe what they should have focused on more was just making the two first runs for Claire and Leon parallel each other better, and just make that tighter. Yeah, the game would be, I mean, I guess you could almost argue shorter on content, but actually that would only be true in a superficial sense, because, again, the second run, to me, does not add anything to the game. Outside of challenge, nothing new is added. They do rearrange where some of the enemies are placed, like some of the jump scares are rearranged, but it's just not enough. It's not enough to really sell me on the second runs being interesting content. And I've come to this, you know, I've come to these feelings on that because my last attempts to replay the second runs after, you know, once again enjoying the first runs thoroughly and thinking, man, this is great, tried playing the second runs again, and I thought, this is so unnecessary, and it just doesn't feel fun. It's the same cutscenes, the same... You're just not getting anything out of it. I don't care about getting more trophies or, you know, unlocking better, like, records or score time or whatever. Like, I'm not a speedrunner. I don't care about any of that. So, you know, they could have, you could still service those types, those 100% completionists, and have gave us more meaningful content. So yeah, I don't care that it technically gives you more stuff to fill in the games, like score records or whatever. That I just don't care about. So, essentially what all this means, what all this adds up to for me, and the lack of replayability compared to the 98 original, I mean, those first runs are definitely replayable. They'll definitely stand the test of time for, you know, however many years this game still looks and sounds as great as it does, which probably long enough. Like, that stuff is still, I'm gonna defend it, sure. But again, the fact that even those first runs don't parallel each other in any interesting way, it makes this game feel smaller, oddly enough, than the original 98 version. It feels like, you know, you're getting less narratively, like you're getting less story-wise. And yeah, I just don't think that's much fun, really. How long have I been going here? Almost an hour. Oh, hello, Mr. Plant Monster. Oh no! He ate Robert Kendo's face. Oh goodness. Really good, like, creepy death animations in this game. They always make me cringe. Good gore effects, too. So yeah, I guess that really is my biggest oh crap, I didn't want to play as Kendo again. Sorry, I tapped X too quickly. I'll get out of that, because we need a change of pace here. Tired of looking at the same character. Um, yeah, again, that's probably, at this point, my biggest criticism, really. It's just not... There's not enough content in this game, that's the problem. Which is a weird thing to say now in retrospect, because it's one of those games where, on first blush, you think there's gonna be a shit ton of it. And it's one of those weird cases where, like, you open a nice big present, right? You got a present under the tree. And it looks really big and really awesome, and you think, oh man, what's gonna be in here? It's got this interesting shape to it, and you think, oh my god, this could be anything. And then you open it up, and it's just a pair of socks. Like, I mean, that's a bit harsh, because I'm not saying Resident Evil 2 Remake is just a pair of socks. But it kinda is, in its own way. Like, you go into it thinking, oh man, 2 characters, we're gonna see this big story from these different perspectives. They probably added a lot of new goodies that we've never seen in the original. Maybe at least a couple new areas or whatever. And then you hear about the second runs, and you're like, oh, they kept that in there from the 98 version. And you just think it's gonna be, at the very least, as robust as the original when it comes to narrative and replayability or whatever. And, but yeah, once you've played it enough, and only if you've played it enough, because obviously you have to see all that stuff, you have to play all 4 campaigns, which are really just 2 campaigns, if we're being honest, you realize, oh, this is a much smaller game than it initially seemed like it was going to be, and that's problematic, because it's already kind of small. It's already kind of a small game. So, it goes from being small to being kind of tiny. I'm not saying tiny is bad. It's still a very sweet, tasty, scrumptious, tiny thing. And, again, like, when I compared it to Silent Hill 3, hell, that was a small-ass game, with only 1 character and only 1 campaign. But you knew that going in. That game didn't give you the expectation that you were getting more. That's the big difference here. It's a matter of expectations. To such a degree that I would even certainly emphasize that if you have no memories of the 98 original, none of this is really going to matter as much to you, because... I mean, I can't exactly speak for those people, because I don't know what it's like to play this game not having played the original. You know, I kind of reserve judgment there, because I don't know. I've heard from some people, you know, that who haven't played the original, that have gone into this one and loved it. I don't know how they feel about the second runs or the extra campaigns, because they might just see that as, oh, they're just like a rearranged hard mode, or, you know. But even so, even if you haven't played the 98 original, I still feel like, you know, the game does kind of give you the impression that you're gonna get this sort of multifaceted story. We're gonna see this whole umbrella conspiracy from, like, different angles, and, you know, you've got this big city as a setting, so there's definitely more areas we could have had to explore. You know. And again, maybe they just didn't have the time. And that stinks. But you know what doesn't stink, viewers? This game. Because despite everything I've said, I still love it. It's a great game. It's still really good. I think it really is just a matter of not being as replayable, not having as much longevity or lasting appeal as I thought it would have, just based on those expectations of having 4 campaigns to play. So the result is that I will definitely replay those first runs over and over whenever I feel like doing so. But overall, as far as remakes go, the production values are great, gameplay is great, structure, mechanics, everything is like perfectly tuned. But conceptually, from a story narrative standpoint, even you know, if we're talking about Resident Evil here, and the storytelling in that series has never been its primary appeal. That's never been its, like, selling point by any stretch. At least not to me. I've never considered it to be, like, you know, certainly not as rich as the Silent Hill series in terms of themes or whatever. But still, Resident Evil 2 for me was always, it always had the coolest plot. It always had the most story potential in the series. And that's why, you know, it's a bit of a bummer. It's a bit of a letdown. But who cares? It's still a great game. I would still recommend it. I still say buy it, play it. It's probably like $40 now, maybe 30, depending on where you go or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, buy it, play it. If you're okay with blood and stuff. If you're okay with nasty things trying to eat you, then you'll love this game. You know? Took a little while. I wanted to share my thoughts about it for a while, but I kept going back and forth. I kept, you know, it took a while for me to get a good perspective, to get a good full view of what this game is to me. That's why I've, you know, kind of held off doing any kind of review or whatever for the longest point, because, you know, that's basically why. I just kind of thought, First I really loved it, now I'm just like, it's okay. It's a good, solid... It's a perfectly strong example of the survival horror genre at its best. But, you know, story could have been better. So I guess that's all I've got to say, really. What else is there to say? I mean, I could talk about Robert Kendo and how much he sucks at not getting eaten. But, I don't feel like that would be a very compelling conversation. So I'm probably going to end it. Probably just going to end this little ramble. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more. And, maybe we'll get a Resident Evil 3 remake. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to see more of Raccoon City then. Maybe they'll do some interesting things with that one. That game only had one character. Can't screw that up as much. Or can they? Can they? I mean, I guess they can. But I don't know, maybe they'll take some of these criticisms to heart. Not from me directly, because the Capcom's never going to see this, but, you know, I'm not the only one who's had these criticisms, so, you know, hopefully they're taking notes over there at Capcom headquarters. You know, we love this remake, but I think it could have been a little bit better, you know. Give us some new stuff next time. Don't be so shy about coming up with new things. There's the mayor's daughter. We didn't even learn that much about her in this game. It's kind of weird. She's just there, but they don't even... There was more about that in the original game. Not a lot more, but... Anyway, bye! Live for the passion.